Okay, so very cool to be here. We have 45 minutes. We thought that we are going to
30 minutes now.
30 minutes now. We're going to take like 20 minutes to talk about it, and then have a more interactive discussion, as this really is I think, the best format that you can get. Matt, why don't you want to start? Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Hunter. I'm Chief Design Officer at the Design Council. And I'll say a little bit about what I do at the Design Council, because I think this sort of meets this question around big societal challenges and, wearables roles in that. But I'll start with a bit of background, because I started, I suppose, in the digital space nearly 20 years ago in Silicon Valley when I joined a company called IDEO, which is sort of seen as a sort of designer innovator, and I was a young interaction designer getting to reimagine a lot of sort of the consumer space. So what would digital cameras look like compared with analog cameras? What would digital music players look like compared with classic music industry? What would navigation systems look like compared with maps? In 1998 we were designing the first e-books. Now we have Kindle, was it 15 years later? But back then we were trying to make it happen. So I guess part of my background that may sort of emerge at some point is what was happening 20 years ago and what's happening now, and what are the similarities, and why is it now that we think is something going to happen, where many of these ideas go back decades, right? But then I moved to the Design Council. So the Design Council, for those of you who don't know, is a charity, actually. It's been going for about 70 years in this country. It used to be really a part of government and is now an independent charity. But its mission now is to improve lives through design. It basically thinks that by shaping the world around us very consciously to improve our lives, from improving economic growth, which is an important part of improving our lives, but just as importantly, improving our quality of life, our health and well-being, our education, trying to resolve issues of crime and security where they diminish our quality of life. These are all important things. So one of the things I do, just finally, is I suppose run something called Design Challenges, which are, if you want to talk sort of startups, I like to refer to them as pop-up thematic incubators. They're pop-up because they're finite. We pick a theme and then we move on. They're thematic because we tackle issues of dementia, crime and violence, youth unemployment, lots of issues in hospitals. And they're incubators because actually the agent of change we think is the startup, and therefore we seed fund and coach startups that make some of this stuff, to make all of this stuff, and lots more besides. So for instance, actually that's one of the only wearables we've worked on. So this is a device for people with dementia, and we'll get into this about what's the difference between this and the alarm that you might hang around your neck, which is typically what people with dementia or in care homes have at the moment. But equally, trying to look at issues of violence. This is a non-smashable pint glass. Tackling people's violence when they're fueled by alcohol is a very complicated thing. But actually one thing you can do is to stop them cutting each other with smashed glasses. So this is now made by Arc International and is sold internationally. Or, unfortunately, on the same theme of crime and violence, I don't know why, 2 weeks ago we launched this intervention. It's a very interesting, simple signage intervention, and it has actually managed to reduce to half the amount of high-level aggression that patients wreak on frontline medical staff. So accident emergency departments in hospitals are very stressed places, and you don't have to be mentally unwell or drunk, which are the two usual precursors for being hostile and violent. You can be completely normal and feel that you're not being served, and yet a very simple design intervention essentially halves the amount of hostility against staff. So what we're always looking for, in summary, are clever little ideas that have the greatest social impact, but also clearly have a business model beneath them as well, so that they can scale. So kind of a social impact model and a business model at the same time. I think that's enough about my background for now. Juergen, tell us about you.
Okay, so I'm running a company called Pioneers, and we're doing quite a lot of things, but bottom line is it's all about entrepreneurship and future technologies, innovative future technologies. And there are a couple of things that really strike us in the last, let's say, 4 years. This is really interesting, if you think about it. So in 1918, 70% of all the products in the market were older than 10 years. Whereas now, 2011, 85% of the products in the market are younger than 2 years. That's a really remarkable trend that we are seeing. It's an unbelievable number. In 2020, there will be 5 billion people connected to the internet. I mean, for every entrepreneur, this is really a good chance to do something and to build businesses around it. 5 billion people. This is what we are doing. We are hosting our annual event about innovative future technologies. It's called Pioneers Festival, once a year, and we have our local events called Pioneers Unplugged. We are doing 100 of them next year, all over Europe, from Moscow to Athens to hopefully London and a couple of other cities. And let me give you some insights, stats and all these kind of things. So we have 2,500 people at the annual event. As you can see, half of the participants are startups and entrepreneurs. There are some investors, corporate students, and the media. It's 55% last year, 45% came from Austria, and the rest from all over the world. And to give you some impressions, we started with, we focused on a lot of other people, web, mobile technology. And at some point it got a little bit, we asked ourselves, is this the bigger picture? I mean, is this everything? What we are doing differently with Pioneers is we are looking at the full spectrum of tech innovation, from robotics to aerospace and some other areas. As you can see here, this is an exoskeleton, so people with spinal cord injury, for instance, can stand up from the wheelchair and just walk. And it's really mind-blowing when you see this. And this is just, it's doable because of future technology that's available right now. Google Glass, of course, a telepresence robot. So we are looking at the full spectrum of it. Mobile and web is still there. Aerospace is our, that's what we like the most. It's very thrilling, so all the Star Trek fans are, they are having a good time in the future for sure. Health is really important. AI and robotics is set to take off. Yeah, some more stats. So we see every year 900 applications from startups from Australia to South America to North America, all over Europe, from all continents. And we see a lot of things happening at the spearhead of technology from startups. These are, and that's really interesting. So a year ago, we always run this challenge. We invite the top 50 of the 800 startups, and then there's a challenge. And the top 8 last year were all software. This year, it was 6 hardware startups and 2 software startups. I don't know if this was a coincidence, but it's really, really interesting. Empatica was a wearable device that measures your stress level. So for instance, if you go to the doctor, you have the appointment, he tells you what you have to do. You go home. A week later, you go back to the doctor. You tell him how it was, but the doctor has no idea what happened in between. I mean, did your stress level go up, and did anything happen at all? So he's completely clueless. That's what they are trying to tackle and change. Solar Brush was a robot that is cleaning solar panels. It's really tricky with all the sand on the solar panels. Virus Aeronautics is an aerospace company. So it's really the whole field. These are our Pioneers Unplugged events that we are doing all over Europe. If you're interested, approach me afterwards. I would really like to bring you to London as well. We also try to bring technology to our Pioneers Unplugged events, like Google Glass or Leap Motion, other gesture controls, to really, not just read about it, but also touch it and feel it and make up your mind if this is really something that you would like to have, or this is just a cool thing, a one-time thing that you want to see and then just leave it. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Very good. Cool. So, okay, before we get down into the subject of wearables, we thought we'd start with the broader sense of emerging technologies. I mean, what's your sense of the opportunity with the emerging technologies and then this topic of social challenges?
So, 1.5 or 2 years ago, the thing that struck me the most, where we were heading into this web mobile area, and I saw one thing. I saw a discussion that included Peter Thiel and more or less famous investor, and he talked about the biggest challenges that we are seeing at the moment, and he narrowed it down to one thing. It's always about globalization. It's all about limited resources, whether it's food or it's energy or whatever it is. It's always about globalization. And he said one thing. It's like looking at, you have two axes. You have a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. And we are always talking about the horizontal axis, which is globalization. So we need more energy, but where do we get it from? We need more food, but where do we get it from? And all these challenges we are facing can basically overcome when you just introduce another axis, the vertical one, which is technology. So if you look at this, then technology is not just here for to tackle social challenges, but all challenges there are, the biggest ones. And that really struck me, and that's why we said we have to look at the full spectrum of innovation, what's there, and because the potential of the impact of technology on our everyday life is just outstanding. And when you see these numbers, 5 billion people connected in 2020, I personally believe, and we believe, that what you've seen from innovation in the past years is nothing compared to what we will see in the upcoming years. It's incredible. Prices are falling dramatically. Moore's Law. We are more empowered than ever before. We have access to education online. Online education will be huge. So all these things, if you add them up, I mean, we could look very brightly into a very innovative future. What's really interesting is if you turn on the TV or if you read newspapers, it's very negative, and that's what I don't get, because if you know what's going on at the speed of technology, then the future actually looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that is because I think for me there's this sort of group of people who are clearly motivated to do amazing things and empowered by technology, and therefore, as you say, they want to pick the biggest issues they can possibly tackle to have the most impact in the world, and that can be both economic as well as social. What's interesting for me is as I moved from the private sector, essentially really, into the public sector and the third sector, so government and charities and things like that, because I suddenly realized the world of innovation was so lopsided. An awful lot of innovation really clearly happens in the private sector, and especially in startups. So when we think of governments and when we think of charities, actually they are truly amazing because they have massive foresight. I mean, I do think that the governments, more than anyone, actually have to look further into the future. So every sector has real power, but they're not particularly good at innovation. And so for me, what's really interesting about digital technology and social challenges is it's actually about a new bunch of people recognizing the power of digital technology. So for instance, a really good example is Cancer Research UK in this country. So there's you may well know, something called Cell Slider. So what it is a website at the moment, but I guess it could be a mobile app, whereby cell samples, so pictures of people's cells, are distributed out amongst the crowd. And you take a look and you go, is this cancerous or not? You're trained for a few minutes on the website to detect some of the indicators about what cancerous cells look like, but ultimately you then start flicking through, deciding whether or not certain slides have cancer. For those of you familiar with Amazon Mechanical Turk, it's essentially the same thing. Putting out piecemeal work and recognizing that humans have better image recognition capabilities in some ways than computers, and therefore it's a human crowdsourcing effort. What's really exciting about that is that's a fundamentally different model of a charity. A charity currently works by you putting your money into the pot, shake, 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 the money goes back to home base, they start processing it, they skim off 10% for their overheads, and they put it to good causes. Volunteering, on the other hand, is you turning up at a soup kitchen at New Year and helping dole out soup. So in other words, there are two models of what it is to be a volunteer. What's really exciting about Cell Slider is I have a nearly 2-hour commute every day. I could sit there, essentially being a volunteer for cancer research the whole time when they get it on an app. And that, for me, begins to change the meaning of what innovation looks like. So I think that's interesting for me, is not only people who might think of themselves in the private sector wanting to tackle big societal issues, but actually people who see themselves in the social sector learning about innovation and enabling innovation through technology.
Do you see some good examples in this area besides?
So, Slido. Well, I think for me, what's been interesting, again, on that crowdsourcing model, because I think that's a really interesting thing. Again, if social challenges are about society rising up to do things together, we all know the power of the web, Web 2.0 as it was labeled, was to connect people together. You know, that we're not just have individual browsing experiences on the web, we're now connected. So one of the ones we funded is called Casserole, and Casserole is a peer-to-peer Meals on Wheels service. So for those people that can't cook for themselves, often local authorities pay for you to have 14 frozen meals shipped to you once every fortnight. And then you're supposed to defrost these frozen meals. It's pretty sad, right? Because you get some basic food, it's okay, but you get minimal social contact. And actually what happens is if you turn it into a peer-to-peer system where your neighbours learn about your needs and a cook 3 doors down sells you or gives you some food, not only do you get the food, but you get the social connection. And what we know is that social isolation, it's often argued, is as bad for you as smoking is. So in other words, social isolation is a massive problem. We become more susceptible to a sense of social isolation, especially as we age. If you use technology to make a fundamentally different view of the way in which food services should work, it's much more powerful. Or another similar one we funded was called Room for Tea, and there happen to be a lot of unpaid interns in London. That's another matter. But if they are unpaid, then of course where on earth are they going to live? And likewise, conversely, there are lots of older people in London who might have spare rooms in their house. Airbnb specifically made for these older people and these younger people. There's a mutual benefit and you get some intergenerational connection. You know, maybe stereotypically the younger person teaches the older person how to use a tablet. You know. So again, all of these ways in which I think we see people being connected through Facebook and Twitter, you know, what would be the social equivalent of that? That is about a new vision of volunteering and charity, you could say, but for the 21st century.
Before, because I think afterwards, or after this, we should talk about that deep dive into the wearable topic. But before we do that, then I just really want to give you some more overview on this, you know, full innovation spectrum, what's out there, because people, you know, normally you don't know about these things. So aerospace, for instance, what's happening there? We normally see asteroids as the ones that will destroy our planet, or at least in a negative way. What's happening right now is, people found out that there are some really cool materials on asteroids. So instead of being scared of it, we just fly up there and space mine asteroids. When you think about the energy lag that we have here with renewable energy, etc., this is an interesting aspect. Another thing, voice recognition. We just talked about voice recognition back there. The founder of Siri basically said that voice recognition is where computing was in the 90s, so we are just scratching the surface. But Google already made the move that it's not any longer the head of search, it's the head of knowledge. And if you think about it, it's now you type in whatever you want, then you get a gazillion of answers, but you just want one answer, right? The right one. So that's going to change. Drones, one of my favorite topics, when most of the people that think about drones, they think about Afghanistan, military drones. Like 99% when you drop the word drones and you're not talking to a tech geek, it has a negative connotation to it. Let me give you the example of Metanet, for instance. In rural areas in Africa, it's really, really hard to deliver medicine to places where you can't go to. Drones can be a potential, way to tackle these problems. And the whole sector of drones is really set to explode. It's not just military. Whenever there's a new technology, there's always the negative side aspect, but the positive side aspect is always bigger. I talked about people with a spinal cord injury and exobionics, but also we are facing an aging population. Like 2 months ago at our last event, we had a very, very young robotics company with us called Blue Daniel Robotics, who are building assistance robots. But the problem is they're just freaking expensive at the moment. but prices are falling dramatically. They will bring down the price for this from 150,000 euros to 15,000, which is a huge drop. And this will help the problems that we are seeing with all this aging population.
I was just thinking, given we started late, we're probably beginning to run out of time of this, so we should get down into sort of the wearable space. So hopefully you can begin to see, this sense. I think you put so nicely with the drones, actually, the idea that these technologies now are often developed at scale, especially funded by a mixture of actually government as well as private sector funding, but they can be used for anything, and that's the most amazing thing, that they are available for people who don't have the funding to develop drones. But what about wearables? I mean, this is a whole nother layer of creative constraint, stuff that we are now wearing on ourselves. Okay, how does that relate to social challenges? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the area that is really the most interesting, besides aerospace, is of course health. So that's affecting all of us. And I personally believe that wearables, we talk about Google Glass and all these watches there are, but if you think about specific cases in the health sector, then it's really interesting. So let me give you an example. In the States, 5% of all hospital patients get infected in the hospital. That basically adds up to, I have the number here, leading to 100,000 deaths. It's basically 35 billion per year. So 10% of the operating budget of the hospital goes into that area. And just because WHO standards are not kept in place with cleaning your hands, etc. So what hospitals in Florida are doing or piloting at the moment is a wearable technology where it's like a wristband. You wash your hand. If you do it properly, there are motion sensors. If you do it properly, it vibrates once. If you don't do it properly, it vibrates 3 times. It's such a thing that you do, I don't know, a gazillion times a day, so you just don't focus on it. But that's one of the interesting.
And even on that topic, I think it's interesting then, smart fabrics. I mean, one of the things you might have seen in the low left-hand corner of my picture was some sort of plastic furniture, and that was fundamentally to tackle issues of infection control. In that particular case, it was about wipeability. So there's a blood pressure cuff. Most blood pressure cuffs are made of sort of woven fabric with Velcro in it. Have you ever tried cleaning Velcro? So this is using magnets and using sort of very glossy fabric. But at the same time, there was a mattress that essentially had a hydrochromic layer in it, and if the mattress was punctured and bodily fluids got into it, the colour would change. So it strikes me, just as much as there's sort of hand washing stuff, it's about the cuffs and about their ability to tell us when they're soiled and all the rest of it. Again, some really important stuff that is within the public space around sort of healthcare, but ultimately stuff that hasn't really been tackled effectively yet.
So you know that wearables is also about design. So I mean, how big is design in this space, or is it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose it goes without saying that having a conference about wearables is, of course, amusing, no doubt, to fashion students, because that's their business, right? So, and that indeed is a really important point, that when you consider the sophistication of clothing, you begin to understand some of the challenges that wearables face, in technology being essentially woven into a very sophisticated ecosystem and value system of the means of physical expression, really. And so that's the thing about design often is, yes, it's about what's useful, infection control, to supporting me as I age, to all the rest of it. What truly is this useful for? How is it usable? What's the difference? We were talking about voice recognition, because I was commenting on the fact that very few people, I find, are talking into their phones, trying to get Siri to understand them. Part of the challenges, again, with wearables is, how do you make it usable? Will it be socially acceptable for people to be fiddling with their clothing? I remember at sort of the turn of the millennium, when mobile phones were becoming much more prevalent, people were beginning to talk with headphones. And it was really weird. I don't know what you felt. It was really weird to begin with, where people were walking down the street or on the bus going, "Hi, yeah, hi Bob, how you doing?" And you're kind of going, is this person mad? And of course we've really learned it's socially acceptable now, everyone wandering around with these things. So I think it's going to be absolutely fabulous to work out what are the weird sort of tics that people are going to have as they begin to interact with their clothing, if indeed they need to interact with their clothing. Will be seen as slightly crazy. So I think there's lots, and then there's sort of self-expression. So from finding true uses of things that are wearable, why do they really need to be wearable, to making them usable, and then ultimately making them work emotionally and sociologically. You know, lots of really challenging levels to it. Because again, there were MIT computer science folks wandering around with portable computers 20 years ago again. So again, I'm always asking the question, you know, why now? What is it that gives us a sense of now being the right moment? What about for you in terms of, you know, clearly one of the things we share is the love of entrepreneurship and of startups and things like that. You know, are there particular, and really interesting to see you talk about, was it 6 hardware companies and 2 software companies, so something a little bit about sort of hardware-driven entrepreneurship and not just software-driven. You got particular thoughts about the world of startups and entrepreneurship and wearables?
Yeah, so wearables is definitely one of maybe the biggest topic in the startup sphere at the moment. I mean, everybody is focusing on it. There's a lot happening. The bottom line is, the way I see it, is entrepreneurship is the tool to bring something that is in your head to the market, which also means not just to one person or 2 people, but to to more people, which makes it even more trickier. So, for instance, if you talk about design, etc., like, who of you feels comfortable or would feel comfortable in wearing Google Glass when talking to another person? No one. One person.
Some people getting.
Yeah, there's a term for it. It's called it's called glass holes. It's really interesting. It's really cool to have the glass on, but how does the other person feel actually? So these kind of things. It's called product market fit. You have to think about this as an entrepreneur, because just the idea itself is not good enough. People will use it, and they will use it in weird ways, and you better make sure that they feel comfortable with using it, and also the people standing next to them. So I don't want to be a glass hole.
Yeah. So, and to some extent, you have to experiment your way through that. I mean, like my sort of anecdote about turn of the millennium and phones and headphones, I guess we don't know as a society actually how we're going to respond to it over time. Do you think that's true or not?
Absolutely, and I was just looking at it. I mean, that basically leads us to the next questions. I mean, what are the big challenges? Right, so I think we talked about costs, maybe?
Yeah.
They are falling dramatically.
With the technology though, I mean, maybe we sort of begin to open it up into a sort of audience conversation as well. Because, you know, like I said, 1998, we were designing one of the first e-books over in San Francisco. And we know that we're 15 years too early, right? And we're 15 years too early because technologically, you don't have the bistable displays, the black and white electronic ink. You don't have the battery supply, the electronics is too big, the whole thing's too big and heavy. And most importantly, a big beast, a big media beast like Amazon hasn't sort of channeled all of its content through, or something like that. Those are some of the reasons why you might argue it wasn't ready yet.
It's kind of the same thing.
What's happening with wearables? Are we, you know, what does everyone feel? Have we got everything we need, or are we actually a decade away?
So who would buy Google Glass? Interesting. So you're fine with charging Google Glass every 2 hours? Like, is that wearable? So maybe that's one of the things we talked about. It's the timing, and are we there yet? Is the battery there yet? Do we have all the components together?
Yeah.
I mean, I've just started Google Glass today. I finally waited for someone to wear it. I mean, I would buy it because I'm a technologist and software exploring. I would think we're still in the stage where we were before with the mobile phone when it was heavy and chunky. So
Yeah. The big Motorola brick.
I think that's where we are at the moment. I mean, you mentioned some other issue you have mentioned, because I alluded to about privacy issues and stuff like that. You know.
Is it socially acceptable to know when someone is sort of gathering data or all the rest of it? You know, there's been 100 or 1,000-fold increase in the number of digital cameras that's around. How do we feel about that? You know, actually, I think most people have become quite used to it, their pictures being taken the whole time. So I'm fascinated personally, again, you know, what's a sociological impediment or not, and what's a technological impediment or not.
Getting used to it that's the interesting part, because, I mean, you can take the smartphone and put it away. You can take the laptop and put it away. You have the glass on. That's a fundamental shift. That society, I think that it will take some years where society has to adapt to it, because it's a way bigger shift, because it's wearable, it should be on all the time, it should be recording all the time, and then you have these privacy concerns, and are you looking at me, or are you watching a movie right now, or what the hell is going on? So yeah, that's the shift for wearables, I think, will be way harder, and of course, now 3 people raised their hands. I consider you as the tech geeks in this room. If you want to bring this to more people, then you probably have to move into fashion, which is even trickier, because I have no problem having the same smartphone that you have, but you know, watches, for instance, that's here. It's more of a fashion thing that should set you apart from others. So. You know.
Yeah. In the interest of time, probably we're sort of, unfortunately, we've probably got to conclude with some sort of closing thoughts and things. I suppose for me, I still wonder what the needs are and have the insight about what is it that wearables does. You know, that concept of wearability of computing or technical resource that others don't. To come back to the example of the little wristband, a bit like a Nike Fuel band you would have seen bottom right. It's called a Buddy Band, and will be shipping very soon. But that's for people living with dementia. And I think the big difference for me is that the technology comes from offender tagging, so tagging criminals so that the state can know where they are when they're on probation. So in other words, it's about someone imposing on someone else an act of tracking. We've been talking about Google, Glass and other things, effectively having a relationship with others. And I made the point that a lot of alarm systems look a bit like this, a big lump, a soap on a rope, as they say, and you say, okay, Dad, you're becoming a bit forgetful. Can I put this on you? And then if you fall over or you get lost, press the button. And my dad would go, sod you, how dare you? How dare you do that to me, right? The interesting thing about that wearables is, for me, the question was, how do I make that so attractive he wants to buy it? He's beginning to think he's losing his memory and his sense of where he is. How would he buy that the way that someone might buy an incontinence pad? You know, if incontinence pads are a discrete way of you dealing with bladder control loss, then why on earth is there not the equivalent, which is the small discrete thing that you buy to give yourself the confidence if you begin to lose your sense of location, you know? And that for me begins to get at why wearables and a sense of intimacy, one reason, might be interesting. But for me, until we begin to understand these deep needs for which sometimes a sense of intimacy and discretion is important, I don't fully understand sometimes, you know, what sits beneath wearables. You know, what are the questions or the needs that it's answering? So those are some things I guess I'm thinking about at the moment. What is it that wearability is an answer for? And I think a lot of the time, especially with an aging population issues and a body failure, it's to do with sometimes being very discreet. Have you got any closing thoughts about things you're interested in?
Well, I'm an optimist and I'm a technology enthusiast, so it's for me it's like Star Trek comes true. I think that wearables are the first phase of it, where we are tackling the tech people. I think it will be very interesting when companies that produce or manufacture wearables will think about going broader than just the tech people. It's also one of the remaining questions for me is also how much emphasis will manufacturers or entrepreneurs put into educating their users about privacy risks, for instance, and how much will have the government to step in. So that's going to be interesting. Yeah, I'm just looking forward to more wearable tech, I guess.
Great.
Good, thank you. Sorry to be a little curtailed, but hopefully there's fun conversations we can have.
I just have one more question. Who of you has or is already a wearable tech enthusiast and wears wearables, of course.
I guess would make you feel bad.
Yeah.
Okay. So like sports, trekking, these kind of things.
They're all rubbish.
They're all rubbish.
Well, they're not. They don't correlate against each other in any manner or form.
You think that they're inaccurate?
No, they are non-correlatively different to each other.
Okay. But you bought them all?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess this is the last session of the day, then overrunning a bit. It's kind of.
We have one question, but we do have reflections on both sessions downstairs at 4:45. So as long as a question and answer can fit that. Yeah, no, there's a reflection session downstairs in the universe room that's going to kind of sum up what the talks from the universe room and the core room. So we can have that one question and then people want to head downstairs. It starts in like 8 minutes.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Not sure how to say it. I work I work in the wearable technology as a designer for wearable technologies. And actually, something I think a lot is that I believe somehow that actually wearable technology is going to die, and that wearable technology, from my point of view, which is my field, is just a step between, honestly, between the technologies physically and the technologies embedded in our own bodies. I'm a strong believer of more smart materials and biotechnology, and just wanted to have your thoughts, because I see more and more people easily going into surgery just for aesthetic reasons. So I think once the technology is truly ready, and I've been looking into new batteries that fit them, electronics that fit themselves from glucose, so that can be integrated in the body, etc. So I really believe just wearable technology is just a step between those two worlds, and then the taboos that we might have putting these technologies in the body. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah. So I absolutely have the same feeling for this. So the thing that we saw is now we have Wi-Fi was important for making wearable technologies possible, but it's still a step in between. Of course, lenses, for instance, would be an obvious thing, way better than just the glasses on would be like lenses for the eyes. We had a guy at our last conference called Neil Harbison. He calls himself a cyborg. He's colorblind. It looks like a camera coming out of his.
Which again, it confronts people a lot. Yeah.
Yes, but now he's listening to colors. So to some extent, these things are already happening, but the technology is just not the area to really move into this space like before.
But then companies that are investing so much in wearables, shouldn't they? I'm sorry if this kind of goes against the conference itself, but I feel, I work on that, and I feel all this energy we're putting into something that I believe if that energy was put into biotechnology and a smart material, we will get there sooner, because we are going to get there anyway. I don't know.
I suppose, personally, I feel a bit mixed about it. So to some extent, let's imagine we weren't talking about digital technology. We were talking about any other form of technology. So how much body modification is there in a mechanical sense or anything else? Typically, I think people sort of think of tools and me. And I am sacred, and tools are not. So some people, I guess we could talk about tattoos or anything else, are very much more into body modification. So I think, again, a sociologist, and I'm not one, would look back into body modification in general and understand the extent to which we might see that just now with a new technology, because we could have had it in the Victorian era or any other time. Where we may well see it, personally, this is me completely shooting from the hip, is more when my body is failing. If what I'm trying to do is get back to what I thought I was, that's a very different proposition. That's kind of me retaining my sense of self, which is quite different from augmenting and transforming my sense of self, which may be exciting to a far smaller part of the population. Not to say it's not going to happen, but again, I'm fascinated to know what's the size of the market of sort of body transformation versus body maintenance, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and the ethics behind it.
And the ethics behind. I recently saw a documentary about body modification where there was one line that really was shocking, where For instance, people that got the legs taken off, there's technology where you can, like Oscar Pistorius, for instance, where you can run faster with technology. But there was also the line where people, like in this documentary, said, like in the future, it will be even though you're perfectly fine, you have your legs, people will take off their legs to just run faster or climb higher or whatever, which is really scary in my opinion. So that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up. It's
Yeah,
a long
yeah.
discussion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions? There is reflections downstairs, so thank you very much.
Very much. Pleasure. Thanks for coming.